I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now. This week on the show, we're talking about Eurovision, the song contest that if you're an American, you probably know about from the Will Farrell movie. Yes, it is that crazy, but it's also really incredible for all types of reasons that we talk about in the show. And for anybody wondering why are we doing an episode on this, wait till we get into it. The story of Eurovision reveals so many aspects of Europe's economy and politics and all these big moments in post-World War II European history. And if you know what, if you like Eurovision, you're already going to like it even more. Whatever the case, the next round of the Eurovision Song Contest is happening Saturday, May 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And there are a lot of reasons to tune in, so we hope you check out the show and enjoy it. Before we get to the conversation, as always, thank you to patrons. You guys are amazing. Thanks for keeping the show going. And don't forget, live Road to Now, Washington, D.C., May 29th, rtmpod.me/listen. That's where you can get links to tickets and to everything else. I hope you have a great week, hope you had a great Mother's Day, and hope you enjoy this episode. Thanks and take care. Paul Jordan, welcome to The Road to Now. Or should I say Dr. Eurovision, welcome to The Road to Now.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. We're going to talk to you about this amazing spectacle, this thing I think that is to so many people, so many different things, which is the Eurovision Song Contest. Before we're going, we have a second person here in studio. You've probably never heard her on the show before. She sat in the room one time when we recorded one, but she is an associate professor of history at Middle Tennessee State University, where she directs the archives program, former Fulbright Scholar in Russia. And just to bring her down a notch, she's also married to me. Kelly Kolar, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that illustrious introduction.
And no problem. I think being married to me says it all. But I wanted you guys to know that she does have other good qualifications. She doesn't just make bad decisions in life. So we're here to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest. And Kelly and I met in Russia. And one of these formative things we did was we started watching the Eurovision Song Contest together, and we'd have parties. And this tradition continues to today. We're going to have a banger at our house going on for the party. It comes on at 2 o'clock here. But I thought for those folks listening who don't know what it is, maybe it'd be cool if all three of us just gave our 1-minute introduction to what is Eurovision. Because I think it'll be something different to all three of us. So let's open up with, one of us is named Dr. Eurovision. So Paul, let you start off.
I find Eurovision very hard to describe. It's very unique to Europe. There's nothing else like it actually in the world on television. And in short, it's a competition that's held once a year where each country sends an entry and Europe votes and decides on which is the best song. The winner then often gets a hit, gets a lot of publicity, and then the country that wins has the right to host the event the following year, and it all begins again. There are some major stars that have come out of Eurovision and some crazy costumes and performances as well. As I say, it's unique in the television year, and I think it's particularly unique to Europe. It's something we've all grown up with, and it's nearly 70 years old. So it's an old part of our childhood history, I think, now.
Kelly, would you describe Eurovision in a nutshell?
Well, I mean, I can't compete with Dr. Eurovision, but I'm always thinking about it from the perspective of an American. And a lot of times Americans think it's going to be something like The Voice or American Idol, and it's not. You know, it's original songs, so that's one thing that's different. I heard someone describe it once, and I can't remember who because I'd like to give them credit, as kind of like the Super Bowl halftime show. But like one song, but every country is putting on a Super Bowl halftime show for 3 minutes because the production is amazing. And that's part of what I love about it, because it's this gigantic production and original songs too. But even if you don't like the songs, watching the production is amazing. And then there's also the geopolitics that goes into it, which was one of the things that really interested me from the beginning, of who votes for who, the voting blocks, who's voting for who this year, won't vote for each other in 5 years, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I will say right here before I give my description, I said we should do an episode on Eurovision, and I was looking through a couple of people, and then Kelly goes, Dr. Eurovision, and sent me the link to your profile. And I was like, yep, head and shoulders above. And yeah, so for me, the way I describe it to people is it's a song contest where you don't really have to like the songs at all. It's a spectacle. It's a spectacle and it's fun. I think that's what's remarkable about it. I'm just like a dude from the country. To me, the music, Kelly will listen to the songs. She likes the songs. My son likes the songs. I don't have to like a single song to enjoy this contest. It is fun, and for me, I don't even want to know them because you see what each country's doing. And so it's like the spectacle of it. And it's just constantly like something new, and it could be something, the most bizarre thing you've ever seen on stage, or it could be the most vanilla, like plain, sounds like a 1950s pop rock song. And to me, it's just that spectacle and the fun of it. So for everyone listening who doesn't know what Eurovision is, 3 different takes, and I think you'll get why it's something worth watching. Paul, let's get into it, because you said people have grown up with it. Could you tell us like the origins of this? Because it is bizarre in that it's all these European countries that come together for this one thing. How did it start out?
Well, it started out in the 1950s, and really looking back at that time, it was very ambitious. It was an attempt to bring broadcasters together, to pioneer new broadcasting techniques, and to basically trial live international broadcasting. If we think, it was very much at its infancy at the time, and there wasn't really many opportunities to have live satellite link-ups. So it really was very ambitious, I think, even in those early days. And one of the things as well is that the context of post-war Europe, the early 50s were a time when Europe was in recovery. It was very much fractured, and it was an opportunity to get together despite any political differences and share that stage. And that ethos is still there today, and I think that makes it really special. And of course, I'm sure we'll discuss that politics comes into it, but in the main, I think it's a really special event, and it's really been transformative for many broadcasters, particularly as they've hosted it for the first time, learning new techniques, learning new technologies, and even thinking about the UK's relationship with our neighbours Ireland. Ireland won in 1970, they hosted it in 1971, but at that time Ireland was a very different country to the one that we know and love today, and their broadcaster was still broadcasting in black and white, and they had to borrow cameras from the BBC in the UK to broadcast this show in colour. And there you have an example of, despite our political troubles at the time, you've got kind of technological exchange going on. And that makes it, for me, really special, even from those early days.
That's impressive. That's impressive that Ireland would ask. It's not impressive that the UK would lend them, because it would kind of look like you're big dogging somebody. But that is still, it's great cooperation, right? Yeah.
Shall I just say something? So Eurovision in the early days, it's not the same show that we know and love today. There was no production values and of course different technology, but it was primarily a radio show in those days, and people often tuned in that way. So you've seen a real evolution as broadcasting has changed. It's become much more of a spectacle. It's become, I think, much more outrageous in many ways, but also ambitious. And that's why you see these big performances now, because every year it's almost like each country is trying to outdo each other. And certainly when it came to hosting the event, that certainly was happening. Russia in 2009 had, at that point, the biggest, most expensive Eurovision ever. And then Azerbaijan in 2012, they tried to top that. So you do see a lot of, I guess, international rivalry coming across on that stage too.
It's bizarre to imagine it as a radio show, because to me, it's so much the visuals. And, a good friend of mine who lives in my neighborhood, Tim Sutherland, he's a Steadicam guy. He runs Steadicams on television and films. So I know how insane that work is. And one of the best social media channels last year was just the guy running Steadicam. And it was just like, how is this guy still standing? Because the production value is so crazy, and the Steadicam guys are doing insane work. And you never realize it because the production's so good when you're watching it on TV.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, I don't know if you've seen a clip, but there's an entry from Belarus in 2009. That's when it took place in Moscow. And there's a Steadicam shot that goes right from the back of the arena, right down to the stage, round the singer. And it's so quick and so slick. It's incredible. It's just amazing how he managed to do that.
If you guys don't know, Steadicam is this massive camera that you bolt to yourself, basically. It's in a harness and it weighs a ton. And anytime you see somebody working Steadicam, it's not on a dolly. It's a person who has this, and they're moving as they go. It is an incredible art.
Do you think there was a turning point where it shifted from this kind of just simple stage production to this kind of competitive, over-the-top spectacle?
I think in the early 2000s, I think so. For a long time, Eurovision, you were mentioning, Ben, that you couldn't imagine it as a radio show. In the kind of 50s and 60s, it wasn't until kind of later on you had dances and performances. It was often just one singer singing into a microphone. And then it changed, and you had groups, and you had dance routines and costume changes and all of that. And that was sort of the 70s and 80s. But it was really the 2000s that things changed. Eurovision was more or less the same in terms of number of participants until kind of mid 90s, and then it opened up to Eastern Europe. But it was the early 2000s that new countries won, and that, I guess, infused a bit of controversy. There were discussions around, Eastern Europe and what that means, the enlargement of the European Union, and all of these things. But what it did bring was a real energy for the contest. A lot of these countries that won for the first time were really wanting to host it. They wanted to showcase themselves as independent countries, and so for them, it was really important to be, I guess, producing something to the same standard and the same scale as larger broadcasters in larger countries in Western Europe. And so that's really when you see the kind of, I think I once heard it described as the technological arms race of Eurovision. And that's really, that came to the kind of, I think, the pinnacle when Azerbaijan built a brand new arena just for Eurovision in less than a year. I mean, we are talking about serious money.
Petrostate right there. They've got the resources to do it. That is fascinating too, the expansion. So we're already getting into something that's important, which is it has this showcase appeal that countries, particularly countries that feel like they want, more status in the world, they really want to host this, and it's very good for them. What's the viewership gotten to, every year? How many people watch this live?
Well, the viewing figures it's an interesting one because over the years they seem to have changed. So in the 70s and 80s, they used to claim up to 300 million watched it. Now they use a different metric and they talk about reach. So I think it's around about 185 million. That's who it reaches. But whether or not they're watching the full thing is a bit difficult to gauge. But certainly, yeah, it's into the hundreds of millions. And if you look at the videos on YouTube, you look at the people engaging on social media and streaming, there is a big, big audience out there. But interestingly enough, whilst Eurovision's been around for nearly 70 years, it's got a young audience, and the audience is growing amongst the younger generation. So that is interesting. But also, it's still quite a traditional TV format. So people don't watch TV in the same way as they used to. They don't sit down at a certain time. Now they stream, they watch on catch up, you name it. Eurovision sort of bucks that trend. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future and if it can continue to engage that young audience whilst being quite a traditional format. So I think we're going to have to look at that in the future.
You did your academic work on like Eurovision and crafting an identity on Ukraine and Estonia, and I would just love to hear more about that. And your book is about Estonia specifically, I think. So maybe if you could just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So it was a happy accident almost. I was at university at the time, and Estonia had won, and they were hosting it, and then Latvia won, and then they hosted it, and it was quite interesting to see how these newly independent countries were showcasing themselves. And I wrote my undergrad dissertation. I was a history student, undergrad dissertation on sort of history of Eurovision from a perspective of European kind of history as well. So looking at basically how Eurovision had reflected the changing map of Europe. Then Ukraine won in 2004, and it kind of all went from there. They had the so-called Orange Revolution, and then on the back of that, they were hosting Eurovision. So it became very politicized. And my tutor basically said, you should think about a PhD. There's loads of stuff here that's not been done before. And I thought, I'll probably get laughed out of the room. But I applied, and I was able to do it. So I specifically looked at Estonia and Ukraine. And I looked at the idea of nation branding, the idea that you can kind of sell your country as a product. And Estonia basically launched a nation branding campaign on the back of hosting Eurovision. So you're having adverts on things like CNN and international news channels, and you see them all the time. You see them like Malaysia, Truly Asia, Incredible India, and they're seemingly innocuous slogans, but actually they're a marketing ploy to get the viewer to see the country in a certain way. And by doing that, you're saying what you are and what you're not. And certainly in the context of Estonia, they were saying that they were not Russian or Soviet, that they were Estonian, and they had a history and a specific identity. And Eurovision in 2002 was an opportunity really to speak to the world on its own terms for the very first time since it became independent. And with that, raised other questions around the Russian-speaking minority in Estonia, as well as multiculturalism. So Dave Benton was one of the singers who won for Estonia. He was black. He was the first black winner of Eurovision, and he was held up as a so-called good immigrant because he'd moved to Estonia and he'd learned Estonian. Whereas most of the Russian speakers in Estonia were seen as kind of bad because they didn't know any Estonian. So it's quite interesting already. You've got this play on multiculturalism, which came quite handy when it came to the EU accession negotiation talks, which Estonia were taking part in at the time. When they hosted Eurovision, that's when they were concluding their talks about joining the European Union. So it was very important in terms of their visuals and the optics, and certainly it showcased how Estonia wanted to be seen. And so whilst it was about Eurovision, of course, it actually was a lot about identity politics and debates around, modern multiculturalism, post-colonialism, and yeah, Ukraine as well, similar debates there. And it does make me laugh though, because when people found out about my PhD, they would laugh and they'd make fun. And I used to go to academic conferences. And then afterwards, when I'd done my presentation, I think they were a little bit more intrigued. But it was all these years later when, unfortunately, tragically, world events changed. But it was when the situation changed in Ukraine, particularly in 2013 to 2014. And of course, after the invasion, that's when my PhD became very valuable. And so all those people that laughed 15 years ago, they're not laughing now.
Yeah, and the politics are involved, right? Because Russia's not invited right now, right?
Yeah, and that's a tricky one because for Russia it was huge and they really wanted Eurovision. So there is a bit of a kind of journey here that I've been on. So my PhD, I did that, and then in my kind of professional life, I guess I moved away from academia and moved into communications. So I was working as a press officer and a comms manager for various different organizations. I eventually got to work for Eurovision itself. And that was fascinating, absolutely amazing, so exhausting. I can't tell you how tiring it was. And I only did it for 2.5 years. And I basically had a lot of amazing experiences, but I just found it so exhausting. But when I was the comms manager for Eurovision in 2016, Ukraine won. And they were surprise winners, shall we say, but also the fact that they'd beaten Russia. Russia were not happy. They had put in their biggest star, a singer called Sergei Lazarev, huge stage show. It looked amazing. And for him to lose to Ukraine was bad. But Ukraine's song was about Crimea. So to lose to Ukraine with a song about Crimea, it just didn't sit well. And so for Russia, they were very, very unhappy. But they used Eurovision as a platform for statecraft, to control their image. They wanted to host Eurovision in 2009. They wanted to host the Winter Olympics. They used these events to gain, I guess, a bit of international credibility. But I remember even being in Moscow in 2009 when the contest was there. And there was this Russian guy who was telling me without a hint of irony about all the cultural victories that Russia had secured. And I think it was something to do with the football. It was Eurovision. And then it was also Miss World. And he said it without a hint of irony. He said it meant that Russia's strong on the world stage. And I was like, wow. So, yes, on a personal level, I find the whole situation really sad. I've got many Russian friends. On the musical level, I think Russia had some amazing songs, but it's a really complex thing. And Russia were expelled technically not because of the invasion, but because of their broadcaster. So it's a competition amongst broadcasters. And technically, the Russian broadcaster, I think, had broadcast government propaganda regarding the situation with Ukraine. And therefore, if they were to take part, it would have brought the contest into disrepute. That's the official rule. But it's very vaguely interpreted. And the situation with Israel at the minute is, I think, a very different situation. Apparently, the Israeli broadcaster has not broadcast any propaganda, so they've technically not broken any rules, and it is a different context. But it just shows you that Eurovision and politics are never far apart. And even when we're talking about the choice of songs, and some countries have had to change their entries and the lyrics and all of that, what is a political song and what is not? And they've allowed political songs, well, songs that I think have been political in the past. A song about world peace is political. So what is political and what is not is a very fine line. And they've not always been great at explaining that or being consistent with their own rules.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why didn't they just shift it to another broadcaster, it's because the Russian state owns all of the television stations. Can't find an alternative.
I've got some fun memories though of that time. I mean, it was quite stressful. I'm not going to lie, because working as their comms officer, I was having daily phone calls from TASS, the Russian news agency, who would find various things that Ukraine had done wrong, and does that mean they would be expelled from the competition? And I was very wary about what I said. But I remember Yekaterina, she was the head of the Russian delegation and the Russian broadcaster RTR. And we got on very well. She's a lovely lady, and she was so excited before the contest that she was going to probably be organising it the following year. And I remember seeing her after Ukraine had won, and it was clear she had been crying and she was very upset. But she just turned to me and she went, "Good luck in Ukraine," and walked off. And I knew that she didn't mean it in a nice way. She was obviously very upset, and they were raging. For them it was a big deal, and it was. Yeah, it's a big deal for them to lose to Ukraine, certainly. And I'm sure, when Ukraine won by such a big victory and such a big landslide in 2022, I guess a lot of people were watching that with great interest.
I find it really interesting because, there's just different interpretation of what's okay politically. I didn't know this part about the broadcasters and whether or not they had used propaganda, because I have Armenian heritage, so I'm always kind of following Armenia. For these little countries, like Snap didn't do very well a few years ago, but then went totally viral. And so it's like a big moment for Armenians around the world. Like people are singing along to this song. But, with all the problems with Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh, there are a lot of people like, well, why are they still allowed to be involved? And I think about, Ukraine singing about Crimea. Even this year we have the Greek entry is singing about a region, right? The Albanian entry is also. So there's definitely a political aspect of what you decide it's not okay or somebody's upset, which now if you're singing about a region of your country
or what you believe.
That wasn't really a question, I guess. Sorry.
No, but absolutely. And it's so much of it depends on context, so a song for Georgia in 2009, they had an entry called "We Don't Want a Putin," and it was a strange sort of disco number. Now, that wasn't allowed to take part, but I think because the Russians had complained it was going to be in Moscow. But if that was in Oslo or Stockholm, no one would have really cared. So it depends on context. And what you say is really interesting because I'm just speculating here, but I imagine both Armenia and Azerbaijan have had tricky times in terms of their broadcaster and what they're saying. And have the EBU, who organise Eurovision, have they looked at that? They could potentially have broken those rules around impartiality and not broadcasting propaganda. Fascinating. And that Nagorno-Karabakh situation has spilled over onto Eurovision many times. And I don't know if you know the story about the voting in 2009.
Is this where someone got in trouble when they investigated them for voting for Armenia? Or I know that happened once, but I don't have my years straight.
Okay, so that all happened in the same year. So in 2009, these little videos, which are called the postcards, they're between each song, and they're broadcast basically to get the stage ready. And they featured basically landmarks from each of the countries. Now, the one for Armenia featured some statues which are in Nagorno-Karabakh. Mm-hmm. Azerbaijan complained and said they were Azeri and not Armenian. So for the grand final, they were edited out. But during the voting, the Armenian spokesperson kept holding up a picture of the statues. So she was really making a point there. And then in retaliation, anyone who voted for Armenia in Azerbaijan were allegedly called in for questioning by the police. I mean, this is kind of crazy stuff. And it just shows you that, politics, as I say, does come in. We've also had examples of, as I said, people having to change the lyrics to their songs. Armenia was an example I think it was in 2015. They had a song called "Don't Deny," and they were asked to change it to "Face the Shadow." I think that was at Azerbaijan's request. But now that could be seen as not political, but I guess in the context of Azerbaijan-Armenia relations, it might be seen that way. Just like a song about equal gay marriage, for example, that could be seen as provocative in some territories. Interestingly enough, a song called "Marry Me," which was about that subject, was allowed for Finland in 2013. In my view, that's political. It seems that some politics is allowed and others is not. It's a strange one. But I'd say a song about world peace could be political too.
Yeah, and just for context, Nagorno-Karabakh is a disputed region that was ethnically Armenian inside. It's disputed whether or not it's Armenia or Azerbaijan. This comes out of the collapse of the Soviet Union and disputes over that. And the song "Don't Deny," clearly a reference to the Armenian genocide, which Turkey and Azerbaijan and Turkey are very close. Don't deny is clearly a reference to the Armenian genocide. We've got a couple of episodes on Armenia, the genocide, and the conflict with Azerbaijan in our back catalog if you want to check those out to learn more.
But it spills over onto Eurovision many times. And even in 2016, in a really childish way, there was this red carpet event at the opening ceremony. And they used to put the countries in alphabetical order. So Armenia and Azerbaijan would always end up near each other. And you were always trying to make sure that they were okay and both sides were okay. And it got to the end of the event. Now, most countries had gone through. Azerbaijan and Armenia were both on that red carpet right until the end. Neither wanted to get off the carpet first. And so it was like this sort of childish tussle between these two singers who probably behind the scenes got on okay. Who knows? It was one of those things where they didn't want to, I guess, like it's almost like show the fear or blink first. That's what I mean to say.
Yeah, and going back to the fact that people, when you said you were studying this for your dissertation, that people would laugh. I get it. If you've only ever seen clips of Eurovision, like, sure, I mean, there are some bonkers performers in this. But the thing that first made it interesting to me was they call on the voting at the end. And there's, each country has its judges, but then they have the popular vote, and they're kind of separate totals. It was remarkable seeing how countries group together. And you can see the affinity among the people in different countries that you would ostensibly say are not friends. Ukraine and Russia would the popular vote would be, you'd see very high for each other, right? Within, you get into the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they vote for each other, even within former Yugoslavia. Has that long been a thing, or is that changing now, or what?
It's an interesting one because I think it's always kind of been there, even from the early days. They said about these Scandinavian votes and block voting. I can't make up my mind whether it's exaggerated because I think we have had such a range of winners that in the end I think it all sort of evens out. But yeah, you can definitely spot patterns, and similarly you can definitely spot countries that will not vote for each other. I think it's an interesting one in terms of geography. And a lot of the time. The public vote, it doesn't take much to swing it, if that makes sense, because all it takes is a small group of people to vote for one country, and then that country gets the 12 points. So, you often saw that with the Baltic states. A lot of those countries would vote for Russia, not necessarily because their relations were good, but it'd be the Russian-speaking minority in those countries. Similarly, Poland gets a very strong vote across the public because of the large Polish community across many European countries. I don't think it's necessarily kind of malicious or problematic because there are many examples of countries which don't have those, big neighbourly votes. Like, for example, Portugal, they won by a landslide in 2017 and they've only got one neighbour. So I think sometimes it's exaggerated, but I think we're at an interesting crossroads now because definitely it's there with the public, but also it's there with the juries. And the juries were meant to... They were brought back to basically counter this so-called block voting or neighbourly voting. And if anything, they do just the same thing. And there's only 5 jury members for each country. That's quite a lot of power to have in their hands. So it's worth 50% of the vote in the grand final. So yeah, I think we're at an interesting point now where the voting is heavily scrutinised, and it is rightly so. But I think it could easily be manipulated by forces that potentially want to rig it somehow. I know there's checks and balances in place to make sure that doesn't happen, but it wouldn't be too tricky to contact 5 people in each country.
I feel like that's a very diplomatic answer from someone from the UK because I often hear complaints like because you guys don't have a voting block, and I think even after Brexit, right? Wasn't that one of the years that the UK got 0 points for the entry?
I think a lot of it is, we haven't been good enough. And I think the UK is maybe judged differently because our music industry is so big. So I think maybe people do judge us on slightly different levels. But no, I think it's to do with the fact they haven't been that good. And overall, you're voting for a country, you're not voting against. And, so people talk about yes, in the past 25 years, we haven't done that well, but we've still won it 5 times and we've come second, 16 times. That's amazing. If that was any other country in the top 2, we'd be screaming that it was a fix. So I think we need to maybe slightly reevaluate ourselves, and potentially it's not about us being treated harshly. Maybe it was in the past we were treated too well because we were one of the few English speaking countries in the contest. So we often had an advantage alongside Malta and Ireland. And those two are also countries that have seen their fortunes dip since other languages were allowed, other countries were allowed to sing in English. So yeah, but the UK and Ireland do vote for each other sometimes, and we gave Ireland 12 points 2 years running when we had these crazy twins called Jedward, and they were very well known in the UK from being on X Factor. So we can do it as well as everyone else.
So you say UK was one of the original members. How many countries were in it originally, and how many countries participate now?
So this is an interesting question. So the UK didn't join the first one, but joined the second one in 1957. So in 1956, there were 7 countries. It was held in Switzerland, but each country submitted 2 songs. So there were 14 entries from 7 countries. Now, Switzerland won its own competition, but that was as a result, and in the very first contest, you've got already a bit of a cloud around the voting. That was a result of Luxembourg not sending a jury member, and Switzerland kindly offered to vote on Luxembourg's behalf. Now, no no prize for guessing why they won then. And they've never actually published the results of the jury deliberations. So who knows what went on behind closed doors.
Can I defend Luxembourg here? They only have like 12 people. Like maybe they all had to be at work that day.
Well, and it's interesting because even their Eurovision singers were often kind of from other countries. So they had Nana Mouskouri, who's a Greek singer. They had a lot of French singers. So Luxembourg have, certainly traded on the international market a lot. But yeah, so that was what happened in the very first contest.
No, so it starts off with 7 countries. So it's kind of the middle of of continental Europe, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. So, and it's neutral territory after the war. And yeah, so it's expanded. It expanded gradually to, nearly 2021, and it hovered around that. Apart from in 1969, there were 4 winners. And Eurovision often, they sort of, in those days, made it up as they went along. So there was a tie in the voting where 4 people had the same points. They didn't have a rule in place, so they declared them all the winner. And so we had 4 winners. And so that meant in 1970, a lot of countries withdrew. I think there were only 12 entries, but most of the time the participation was about 18 to 21 countries, and that was more or less the same up until the early 90s. That's when Eastern Europe expanded. The Iron Curtain came down. A lot of them joined Eurovision, but that's also when you then had, I guess, more competition to take place. So they introduced relegation systems and various different ways of trying to organise a fair competition. And that's why we've now got the semi-finals where everyone can enter and at least every singer can sing on that Eurovision stage. And it's roughly about 40. This year we've got 37. I think the maximum was 43 or 42, but roughly just under 40. A lot of countries in recent years have had to withdraw because they can't afford the participation fees. A lot of broadcasters are really struggling, and Eurovision, like live television, is an expensive thing. So, some countries have sat it out, but and other countries, as I say, Russia, Belarus, they've been banned, and Turkey withdrew when it was very popular. But I think that's more about the politics of what's going on in Turkey rather than the song contest itself.
That was something I had a question about, were countries that stopped participating. And a lot of times I hear that it's cost, but like with Hungary, I've heard that it was about it being too progressive. And I don't, I feel like it's just rumor I've heard. And I was wondering if you know or could speak about that. Are there countries that stop participating because the politics of it are too progressive for them?
I think certainly the way Eurovision has changed since, I would say, over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, it's become a lot more overt in some messaging. I would say the bearded drag queen Conchita, when she won for Austria, that was a big moment for a lot of countries. I think that was quite powerful though, because it showed you can't necessarily judge people by their governments, and a lot of very conservative countries voted for that act. So I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, I would say that certainly Turkey's withdrawal and Hungary's withdrawal are more about the politics of what's going on in those countries rather than anything to do with finances. And certainly for Turkey, Eurovision was a huge show, it was a big audience, and they even tried to start their own version of the competition called Turkvision, which had Azerbaijan and no, it wasn't as good. It had Azerbaijan and certain countries with some sort of cultural link. You had Tartars, and so there were lots of different entries that weren't necessarily countries. Yeah, a bit of a strange kind of show to try and get off the ground. It didn't work. But yeah, you definitely can see, I think, sort of patterns with participation mapped out against what's going on in those countries. Similarly, with Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus. The first time that Cyprus voted for Turkey was when Turkey won. That was 2003. So obviously quite a popular song. But the presenter of the vote said, "Peace to Cyprus, Turkey, 8 points," I think it was. Now, that was also at a time when Cyprus and Turkey's relations were improving because Cyprus was joining the European Union, and they had to have some agreement regarding the border and the recognition of Northern Cyprus. So that was an example, really, of it being overtly mentioned in the broadcast, but also, they were exchanging points for the first time. Yes, Turkey had a popular song, but also they'd never done that before. So interesting that that was happening at a time when relations were also improving. And also Turkey and Greece. In 99, there was a really strong earthquake in Turkey, and Greece sent aid for the first time. And then Turkey, I think, reciprocated when there was another earthquake in Greece. And that was when they started exchanging points, and they'd never done that before. And even in the 70s, they refused to take part in the same contest. If Turkey took part, Greece withdrew. When Greece withdrew, Turkey returned. So yeah, it's amazing how things can change, but then sadly, it's also not always for the better as well. And it's sad when countries seem to be going down a different path to more progressive ones.
Anyone who tuned into this show, I would say for the last maybe 20 minutes, will be surprised to find out that we're talking about a song contest in Europe called Eurovision. And this to me is the more fascinating stuff about it, but it is a song contest, right? And I'm still blown away that anybody was really surprised to think that you could get a good dissertation or good research out of this, because it's all there. But we've talked about the way that international conflict, affects things, the way that relationships affects things, migration impacts the voting. So do you think the best song wins?
Oh,
Oh, controversial question. I think, well, what is a song? I think it's all subjective. It's someone's opinion. So I guess that's why it's almost a bit of a ridiculous concept, because, who decides what is the best song? Is it something which is in the composition? Is it the performance? Is it the voice? Again, someone might love Mariah Carey and absolutely loathe her. Celine Dion, she won it in the 80s. So what is the best song? How do you judge it? I don't know. But to answer your question, does the best song always win? In my view, no. And quite often, I would say there have been some poor winners compared to ones that didn't win, maybe second and third places. Sometimes they're my preferred choice. And certainly in the last 2 years at least, my favorite song has certainly not won.
Is it possible? Because ostensibly, too, it's a song contest. It's about the songwriting, which is nuts because clearly the visuals impact everything. But what I'm saying is do you think that the political, all the implications we talked about, political, social, all this, ultimately comes down to shape the victor in a significant way that might at least override the song itself?
I think it's possible, and I think that's definitely happened. I think Ukraine in 2022, they had a good song, but I think in any ordinary year, it probably wouldn't have won. And there was such a big groundswell of support for Ukraine. I think it's difficult to say, though. Last year, there was a breakthrough with the first non-binary singer winning, but I'm not sure people would have known that from watching it on television. Again, they had a good song. I think certainly there are times when there has been a bit of a feeling that the victory was more political than others. But I think in general, I'd like to think it's mainly about, the music and about something, whether it's a performance or um, something that's captivated people. I don't think the viewers at home are as politically engaged as we think they are. And I think, for example, when Turkey won for the first time, that was a big deal for Turkey. And certainly at a time when they were looking to Europe. But that wasn't a political victory, I would say. I think it was more about them entering a song which was in keeping with what was popular at the time. There was this big hit in Europe at the time called Kiss Kiss, and it was like a dance number, and it was really well known. And their song the following year in Eurovision, when they won, sounded like that. So I don't necessarily think people were voting for Turkey because it was Turkey. But I don't know. It's an interesting question. It'd be interesting to see now what happens. And certainly last year with Israel, there was a really strong public vote for Israel and yet there wasn't with the juries. And I think it'll be the same again. And I can only think that's political. Um, and it's a really difficult situation, and it's one that I'm not an expert on, but I do know that a lot of people in the UK, for example, voted for Israel who wouldn't necessarily have been watching Eurovision, and that I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, because that to me is using Eurovision as a political thing, and I don't think it should be, even though I do acknowledge and I find it interesting that politics comes into it. But I like the fact that in theory, countries set aside those differences, whether it's Brexit, whether it's fishing wars or whatever, they set aside those things and share that stage, and that's really powerful. And I'd hate it if that changed.
Paul, you've touched on this a couple of times. I want to ask the question that perturbs me the most. Okay, this is a question, but you're going to hear there's definitely some irritation in this. All right, you've just noted that Israel is in Eurovision, but is Israel in Europe? And the bigger one, let me say, Israel's not even. Australia is in Eurovision.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me how? And I was just using Israel to jump to Australia. That's the clear one.
Mm-hmm. Well, Morocco used to be in too, right? Mm-hmm.
So how is a country on the other side of the planet, which I don't think anybody would say it's in Europe,
Australia, it's its own continent. Yeah.
But why are these countries? How do they manage to become a part of Eurovision? Because we know the concept of Europe is very culturally loaded. How is it that they managed to end up in this competition?
If only I had $1 or £1 or €1 for every time someone asked me that. So Australia's a bit of an outlier, but Israel, their broadcaster is a member of the European Broadcasting Union and are therefore eligible to take part in Eurovision, as are a lot of other countries in the area, in the European broadcasting area. So that includes Northern Africa. So that's why Morocco took part in 1980, but they also only took part when Israel did not. And there were plans for other countries, I think Tunisia and Lebanon also planned to take part, but then Lebanon in 2005, it turned out that they weren't going to broadcast the Israeli entry, which was against the rules. They were therefore thrown out because they don't want to acknowledge the state of Israel. So Israel's participation has always been a bit controversial, but that's the reason why. And they've been in it since the 1970s. Australia was a slightly different one. Australia were invited to take part in the grand final in 2015 to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the contest. Australia had been broadcasting it every year since the early 80s, and it was a one-off, and it was seen as a bit of fun. Then the Australians returned the next year. They asked if they could join the party again, and I think the European Broadcasting Union, probably quite rightly, thought, well, this is a country that's enthusiastic, they pay their bills, why not let them in? So I think there is an element of money talking there, but actually Eurovision's huge in Australia. There's a big following there. And you could also argue, and this again is potentially controversial, but you could argue that there is a lot of European culture in Australia, and certainly a lot of European immigrants and diaspora. So their participation is not actually that abstract. And I think it has a natural kind of link to Europe in that sense, or a certainly historical one, where and I know a controversial one as well. But you could argue that in a way, Eurovision's never really followed the borders of geography. I mean, is Azerbaijan in Europe? I mean, where are the lines or the geographical lines of where Europe starts and exists? And of course, Turkey was always the one that straddled both, as did Russia, I guess. So yeah, it's not about geography. It's about membership of the EBU. It's also, I think, about money. And interesting enough, again, a little bit of politics, because there are countries that want to join, but for some reason aren't allowed. So there's two, there's Kosovo and Kazakhstan. Now, I think Kosovo is because they're not a member of the EBU, or there's something there, or an association, but they have openly said they want to be part of Eurovision. Now, I think they're not letting them in because it might upset Serbia and other countries that don't recognize Kosovo. And similarly with Kazakhstan, I think there's an issue with their membership, but they also entered Junior Eurovision. Now, Junior Eurovision started more than 20 years ago. It's like a kids' version of the Song Contest. It's even stranger than Eurovision, but they allow Kazakhstan in. So it's strange that they don't allow them into the adult version. And I don't know why that is, but I guess it shows they do have some parameters of membership and who is allowed and who is not. But I'd love to know what they were.
Yeah, because I mean, Europe is a false construct created by like ancient mariners, but it's not. I mean, part of Kazakhstan stretches into what we would consider Europe. So I guess it is about that. Oh, poor Kazakhstan. Nazarbayev's heartbroken about that, I'm sure.
So, a lot of the listeners to this will be in America, and maybe this will be the first time they're hearing about Eurovision. So I feel like we got to hit some of the greatest. I think you already mentioned Celine Dion won the competition, but I feel like we can't not bring up ABBA, and which is usually who I bring up when I try and sell the competition, because I feel like the whole spirit of ABBA is the spirit of Eurovision. But I'm curious, when ABBA won, like at the time, was there something special about that? Would they have because this is, one of the most successful groups to ever have come out of Eurovision, out of anywhere in the world, or is it just looking back now, we know that ABBA becomes what it is, and so it seems so significant this time at Eurovision from them?
So it's an interesting one, because I think there are certainly some big names which have come out of Eurovision. There's Julio Iglesias as well, but he didn't necessarily need Eurovision to become big. Riverdance became a worldwide phenomenon, an Irish dancing phenomenon, after it became part of the Interval Act. But I think the difference between ABBA and Celine, ABBA needed Eurovision to break out of Sweden. It was the only platform they had at the time to break out into the international market. And that's why they sang in English. And that's why they very quickly released albums afterwards to really capitalize on, the success of that song contest. So I think Eurovision really did launch ABBA. And, even the members, Benny and Bjorn, the songwriters, they acknowledge that. And I think Bjorn Ulvaeus speaks very highly about Eurovision, and he speaks very powerfully about it, how he views it as something that Europe needs, and it's a fight against what he calls dark forces. So I think that's really powerful. And I agree with him in that sense. I think it's almost like a very joyous event. And the pandemic showed that we need a bit of escapism, and we need something that is not political and which is ironic considering all the stuff we've discussed, but something which allows us to just forget about our troubles and sit down and enjoy something completely different. Whereas with Celine Dion, she was already a bit of a star in Canada. She was a child star. She was trying to break out into the international market. But her success at Eurovision really didn't impact on her mainstream success. She didn't really make it until years later, and it was in America, Where Does My Heart Beat Now, in the early 90s. That's what did it for her. But I guess Eurovision gave her that platform to get a record deal in English. So you could argue that it did have some kind of influence, but it's really, I think, I'm a big Celine Dion fan. I think it's really Beauty and the Beast that was the big breakthrough internationally for her when she sang on that soundtrack, rather than her Eurovision song, which incidentally she's never really performed again. She was said to have hated it. And there are rumours that she's going to be appearing in the grand final this year, which I'll be amazed if that does happen, given her health, and the fact that she's she's not really liked Eurovision, doesn't really speak about it much.
Well, the thing that I frequently cite to tell people to put it in their cultural awareness is the Will Farrell film. Eurovision song, was it Song of Land?
I can't remember.
Fire and Ice.
Fire Saga story.
Yeah, which I have on more than one occasion told people, it's like in that Will Ferrell movie, and they've gone, wait, that's a real thing? That Eurovision's a real thing? And I was wondering, it's a fantastic movie, but what was the Eurovision community's reception to that film?
I think they were kind of divided on it. I think some people thought it was brilliant and great fun, and I think other people thought it was a bit offensive, to the point. Even I know someone who said that the, Icelandic accents that that Piers Brosnan did was offensive, and I don't know. I think, for me personally, I loved it, and I thought it was actually incredibly clever. Will Ferrell went to Eurovision a few years running and did a lot of research himself. And so when I was watching it, having my experience of working on it and going to it for so long, I actually recognized some of the characters. The bossy stage person, the person doing the PR. I really recognized who those people were based on. And so for me, I just thought it was a brilliant film with great music, but also a very clever kind of piece of, I guess, entertainment, which told a story which was based loosely on some kind of fact. Of course, a lot of it was ridiculous, but that's a Will Ferrell film, right? And that's what it was always going to be. But I thought it was very well done, and I actually listened to some of the songs from it on my playlist every now and then.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, one of the songs was nominated for Academy Award, and a lot of us were rooting that it would win. It was so fun.
Yeah. Called Husavik is a beautiful song.
Yeah.
And actually the UK entry this year, they've covered that, and they're singing on that. There's a clip they released on YouTube about that. But there's also a Russian entry. Lion of Love or something, and it's almost based on a lot of these acts you see. So you see the hamster wheel, which was a thing for Ukraine in 2014. You see the Russian singer that year. He looks very much like Russia's entry from 2011, a guy called Alex Sparrow, I think his name was. And so yeah, the attention to detail I thought was incredible.
It was a mockery, but it did seem something like a love letter to Eurovision.
I think
So
so. And they put in a lot of effort to do the research. And I think, if they'd done a film and never gone to it, then yes, I would have said absolutely no way. But the fact that they did pay so much attention to the finer detail backstage, they obviously took it seriously.
we got just a few minutes before we go, but for everyone listening, I'm sure there's people that started off listening, what is this? And now they cannot wait till it airs. And by the way, it airs on May 17th, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. here Central. So I'm sure everybody's wants to watch it. Paul, what should we look for this year? What do you think are the most exciting things going on, and anything new that's going on, or anything you're seeing that looks, where's the new and where's the traditional we'll see?
Gosh, well, it's quite tricky to say because they've clamped down on a lot of the rehearsals. Before, you used to see a lot of the videos and things. Now they're releasing much shorter segments. So I've only seen very small clips. But what we're going to see is a lot of colourful performances. So we've got a lot of novelty songs this year. Estonia have got a song called Espresso Macchiato. Bizarre song, bizarre dance routine. But I think it's going to do really well. I think it's going to get the public going. Sweden are singing about a sauna, and it's a Finnish group representing Sweden. It's very, very catchy, great dance routine. If we're looking for more traditional ballads, then Switzerland have got a very strong song. It'd be interesting to see how that is the reaction for that on the home turf. Israel have got a very powerful song. And the Netherlands is quite a catchy one as well. But a lot of it depends on how it comes across on the night. Sometimes people can have the best song in the world, but if they can't sing, there's no saving them. So, yeah, who knows? I'm just trying to think of there are quite a few numbers. And if you like a bit of drama, then Spain are serving a lot of drama. They've got a woman who she's called Melody, and the song is called Esa Diva, and it's all about this diva, and it's just incredibly well performed. But my goodness, to say someone attacks a song, she grabs that song and performs a life out. So whether that is going to be good or it will come across as too aggressive, I don't know. But my goodness, she can sing.
Do you have a personal favorite?
Yes, my favourite is Malta. Now, Malta's a bit of a controversial one. I don't know if you followed the story. They've changed the title called to Serving. It used to be called Cant, which was spelt Kant, and that means singing in Maltese, but that was the only Maltese word. So when she was saying Cant, it sounded very different to the word that she intended to say. It was changed at the request, apparently, of the BBC. I love it. I love the song. It's very well performed. And actually, I like the message of the song. And the chorus talks about why should we let other people decide who should be living our lives. And I think there's something to be said for that. So I'll be, voting for her song about serving something.
Ben likes to go in blind, but I listen ahead of time, and I also really like that song. And I'm a huge fan of the Albanian entry this year. I really like the Zerum, and I'm really excited for that one. And I'm hoping for a top 10 finish for Albania, and I think that'll be really fun.
And I think that could happen. I think, we're often seeing, countries almost like doing well because they're not singing in English and they've got traditional elements. So you saw that in 2017. There were loads of songs that did well. So I think, they're ones to watch as well. What I like about it is at this time of year, I've heard all the songs so many times, I almost lose all sense of perspective. And it's only when you're watching that live show that you actually think, wow, that's the winner. That one's going to get it. But who knows? I think it's Sweden's for the taking. But who knows? You can't predict the juries, and the juries and the public are often very different, and they have been for the past few years. And I dare say it'll probably be the same again this year.
We mentioned our son. He's 10. He likes to listen to music, which is partly why this is such a great event for us in America as parents, because it comes out at 2 p.m. We have a party, and it doesn't matter that you have small children. But from listening to music with him and the songs he particularly likes, I have a piece of Eurovision trivia that I'm wondering if it's possible that this is the first time ever that the word spaghetti is in two songs in Eurovision, because it comes up in Espresso Macchiato and it's also in Tutta Italia from San Marino. And I just think, how is it possible that two Eurovision songs have spaghetti in them? It's not significant, but it just sticks out in my head always as a kind of funny bit of trivia.
That's, I think, a brilliant piece of trivia, and I might steal that if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
But also the line, I mean, life is like spaghetti, it's hard until you make it. That's the Estonian line. I mean, sometimes Eurovision songs aren't known for their brilliant lyrics, but they are fun. And, that's a great piece of trivia. The one that I've not mentioned, and I used to really like it when I first heard it, but now it really upsets me, is Ireland. Now, Ireland have got a song called Like a Party, and it's about this Russian dog that was sent into space in the 50s and died. And I've got a dog, and it's just horrible. Like, we're dancing away to this song about a dead dog flying around in space having a party. It's a weird entry to have, and it was very catchy, and I liked it when I first heard it, but now I've started to think about it, maybe overthinking it, but now I just can't bear to hear it. It just makes me feel so sad for that poor dog.
It's odd. It's an odd one.
Yes, like
only at Eurovision though. Where else would you see this?
I know a song that says "I hope that like is still alive up there." It's like, oh, I don't think you do.
She's definitely not. Even if she had survived the original.
Like, let Leica die. I mean, if she's still alive 5 years ago, it's time.
And it's quite cool because she's actually Norwegian. It's actually a Norwegian brother and sister that are representing Ireland. So you often get that, different people representing different countries. And, again, that's, I guess, an example of sort of what an international event it is.
Yeah, well, this has been great. Paul Jordan, Dr. Eurovision, I'm so grateful you joined us here to talk about this thing that clearly my family loves. Where can people find you if they want to learn more, they want to follow you, they want to get more of your insight on Eurovision? Drop your links and socials on us.
Yep, sure. So I've got a website, dreurovision.com, dreurovision, all the one word.com, or you can find me on Instagram, Dr. Eurovish. That's at dreuro and then VISH, or X/Twitter at Dr. Eurovision.
Just believe in yourselves, America. If Australia is in this contest, we could be in it too.
Absolutely, and enjoy the party. And never mind Christmas. This is the most wonderful time of the year.
Definitely.
Definitely. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Gary Fletcher, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.